The storm arrived without warning. One moment the mountains of the Ashenmore Highlands were quiet and grey beneath a heavy sky. And the next, the clouds split open like a wound. Rain crashed against the ridge trails. Thunder rolled through the valleys. And Tessa Whitfield realized she had made a terrible mistake. Her horse stumbled on the slick mountain path, nearly throwing her from the saddle. When the mare tried to step again, she faltered, refusing to put weight on her front leg. Tessa slid down immediately. "Easy, easy girl," she murmured, running a hand down the trembling leg. Lame. And the storm was only getting worse. Her map was already dissolving in her hands, ink bleeding across the parchment as rain soaked through the leather. Satchel at her side. She looked up toward the ridge. There was only one place nearby that offered shelter: Holloway Keep. According to every survey record from the Western Cartographers Guild, the castle had been abandoned after the border wars 3 years earlier. The notes described it as nothing more than a ruin, empty stone walls left to weather and wolves. Perfect shelter. Or so she thought, leading the injured horse slowly uphill through the rain. Tessa pushed open the great iron gate. It swung inward far too easily. The hinges were oiled. She froze. The courtyard braziers still held fresh ash. The stable held dry straw, and the water trough wasn't frozen. Someone lived here before she could even decide whether to leave. The castle doors opened. The man who stepped into the doorway looked like he had always belonged. They're tall, broad-shouldered, barefoot on the cold stone, as if the mountain itself had shaped him. His sandy brown hair fell loosely around his face, and he held a book in one hand, as though a stranger arriving in the middle of a violent storm was nothing more than a minor interruption. But it was his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. Dark olive, green, watching her with something that wasn't surprise or anger. Recognition. Something stirred beneath Tessa's skin. Not a spark, not a shock, a slow, building hum, like the air before lightning strikes. She pressed a hand to her chest. Confused, the feeling only grew stronger. "Your horse is lame," the man said calmly. His voice was low. Steady. Tessa blinked rain from her eyes. "I know. There's a stable through the archway," he continued. "Warm stall, dry grain. I'll look at the leg. I can manage my own horse." His mouth twitched slightly. "I don't doubt that." He stepped aside, opening the door wider. "But the storm is settling in," he added quietly. "And that leg won't carry you down the mountain for at least a week." A week. Tessa glanced back at the sky. The clouds were stacked in heavy layers of charcoal and iron. She knew these mountains well enough to understand what that meant. This wasn't a passing storm. This was a siege. She looked back at the stranger. "Who are you?" He studied her for a moment. "Tieran." No title. No explanation. Just a name. "Tessa Whitfield," she replied. "Western Cartographers Guild." A faint smile touched his lips. "I know what a cartographer does." Most people don't. Most people don't live alone in a mountain castle with a library full of survey records. Tessa hesitated. Then Tieran stepped aside again. "Come inside, Tessa Whitfield," he said gently. "You're soaking through your maps." She looked down. The ink was already bleeding across the parchment. Hours of careful work dissolving in the rain. Her choices were simple. Stand outside and lose everything, or trust the stranger in the doorway. She stepped inside. Warmth of the great hearth hit her like a wall. The castle wasn't abandoned at all. The stone floors were swept. The walls repaired. But the enormous hall, built for hundreds, was clearly inhabited by only one person. One chair by the fire, one table, one life. The kitchen is down the corridor, Tieran said, gesturing with the book still in his hand. The library is through there. Rooms upstairs. Take whichever one doesn't leak. You live here alone? She asked. I do. In a castle? It was available. Something in his voice made her decide not to ask more. Not yet. Later that evening, when she came downstairs, Tieran was pulling bread from a clay oven with his bare hands. 2 bowls of stew waited on the table. Cups. 2 places set. You bake your own bread? She asked. There's no one else to do it. That's not really an answer. He met her eyes. Yes, he said simply. I bake my own bread. She sat. The food was better than anything she had eaten in weeks. And the strange hum in her chest, the electric pull she had felt since the moment she saw him, had not faded. If anything, it was getting stronger. And the storm outside the castle walls had only just begun. By the 3rd day, the storm had turned the mountains into a grey, roaring ocean of wind and rain. Leaving the castle was impossible. Tessa knew it the moment she looked out from the tower window that morning. The valley below had disappeared beneath sheets of rain, and the ridge trail she had climbed only days before had become a ribbon of mud and rushing water. She wasn't going anywhere. And somehow, that realization made the strange humming in her chest even stronger. The castle itself slowly revealed its secrets over those first few days. It was not a ruin, not even close. The stone halls were old, but carefully maintained. Fires burned in the hearths that mattered. Repairs had been made where storms had damaged the walls. But what struck Tessa the most was the silence. This was a castle built for hundreds. Yet it held only one man. 1 chair by the hearth. 1 cup on the kitchen table. 1 life echoing quietly through dozens of empty rooms. Naturally, Tessa began mapping it, not because she needed to, because mapping was what she did when she didn't know what else to do. She mapped corridors. Staircases. Collapsed sections of the east wing Tieran had warned her about. Even the small observatory tower at the top of the castle, where glass windows wrapped around the circular room like a crown. Tieran never questioned it. He simply moved through his castle the same way he had on the first day, calm, steady, and completely comfortable in his own solitude. He read often. Books seemed to follow him everywhere. Sometimes, Tessa would glance up from her maps to find him sitting by the fire, turning a page slowly while the storm howled against the walls. Sometimes he baked. Sometimes he cooked. And sometimes he simply stood at the windows, watching the mountains like someone who knew every ridge and valley by heart. But what unsettled Tessa most was what he didn't do. He didn't interrogate her. He didn't ask why a young woman traveled alone through dangerous mountain ranges. He didn't question the ink stains on her fingers or the way she spread parchment across every table in the castle. He simply existed beside her. Quietly. Steadily. Like deep water beneath the surface of a lake. And that strange electric pull between them kept growing. On the first day it had been a hum. By the 3rd, it had become something else entirely. A current. It moved beneath her skin every time he passed close behind her. Every time their hands brushed while reaching for the same book. Every time she heard his voice behind her in the library. She felt it again that afternoon. Tessa had discovered something. Extraordinary in Tieran's library. Decades of survey records. Highland topography carefully recorded by someone who had clearly loved this land with obsessive dedication. The data filled massive gaps in the Western Guilds maps. She had been cross-referencing the records for hours when a cup of tea appeared beside her elbow. "You've been working for 6 hours," Tieran said quietly. She blinked, startled. "Has it really been that long?" "You missed lunch." "I don't miss meals." "You missed this one." He leaned against the table beside her. Too close. The current between them surged. Instantly. Tessa gripped the edge of the table as electricity seemed to rush through her veins. Tieran's jaw tightened slightly. He felt it too. "Eat something," he said. "The maps will still be here tomorrow." "That's the problem," she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. But the truth pushed through the careful walls she had built over years of constant travel. "I don't stay anywhere," she said quietly. "I pass through. I chart the landscape. And I move on." Her hand moved over the scattered maps. "That's how my life works." Tieran said nothing. The silence stretched between them. "I'm going to leave when the storm breaks," she continued softly. "And I don't want to fill in spaces I'm just going to walk away from." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "My brother built this library." Tessa looked up. "He was the one who collected these survey records," Tieran continued. "He loved this valley, knew every ridge, every river." His voice grew quieter. "He died in the border wars." The storm outside the windows roared. "And after that?" Tessa asked gently. "I sealed that passes into the Highlands." The words landed heavily. "I told the world to stay away." She slowly realized what that meant. "You're the ruler here." Tieran didn't answer immediately, but she had already seen the evidence. The royal seal stamped on the survey records. The crest carved above the fireplaces. "You're the Alpha King," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "Yes." She studied him carefully. The man who baked bread with his own hands, who read books beside the fire. Who lived alone in a castle meant for an army. "Does that change anything?" he asked. Tessa thought about it. About titles. Power. Distance. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "It doesn't." The current between them flared brighter than ever. Outside, thunder cracked across the mountains. Inside the library, something far more dangerous was building between them. And neither of them knew how long they could pretend not to feel it. By the 5th day, the storm had become part of the castle. Wind screamed through the mountain passes like a living thing. Rain lashed the stone walls. Thunder rolled through the highlands again and again, as if the sky itself refused to rest. Inside Holloway Keep, the silence between Tessa and Tieran had changed. The current between them had grown impossible to ignore. Every glance carried weight. Every shared meal felt like something dangerously intimate. And every time they stood close enough to touch, the air between them tightened like a bowstring drawn too far. The tension finally broke in the tower observatory. It was the highest room in the castle, a circular chamber, wrapped entirely in tall glass windows. From there, the storm looked almost beautiful. Lightning turned the mountains white for a heartbeat at a time. Rain streaked the glass like silver threads. Tessa sat on the stone floor, sketchbook balanced on her knees, drawing the violent landscape outside. Mapping was the only language she truly trusted. Across the room, Tieran stood at the window. His hands rested on the stone sill as he watched the storm, in silence. The blue-white flash of lightning illuminated him for a moment. Tall, solid, wrapped in a heavy slate cloak against the cold. He looked like part of the mountain itself. Ancient. Unmoving. Evitable. Double quote. She said softly. He turned. For the first time since she had met him. His expression wasn't guarded. It was open. Raw. And filled with something that looked dangerously close to hope. The current between them surged. 5 days of proximity. 5 days of tension. 5 days of shared silence and quiet. Conversations beside the fire. Tessa stood. Suddenly. Her sketchbook slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. She crossed the room in 4 quick steps. Then she took his face in her hands and kissed him. The world exploded into electricity. Not a spark. Not a jolt. A full body surge that rushed through every nerve in her body. Tieran froze for half a second, as though the moment was too good to believe. Then his hands moved to her waist, carefully. At first. Then firmly, pulling her closer. He kissed her back, like a man who had been waiting for this moment far longer than 5 days. Like someone who had spent years standing in empty halls, wondering if anyone would ever walk through his gates again. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Breathing was rough. His hands trembled slightly where they held her. The current between them had changed. It was no longer wild electricity. It had become something deeper. Steady. Constant. Like the echo of a bell that never fully stopped ringing. That's going to make it harder to leave, she whispered. Tieran's voice was quiet. Then don't. 2 simple words. Not a command. Not a king's order. Just a man who had been alone for 3 years, asking her to stay. Tessa closed her eyes and rested her forehead against his neck. The storm howled around the tower. Neither of them moved for a long time. The storm finally broke on the 7th morning. Tessa woke to silence. For 6 days, wind had screamed against the castle walls. Now the world outside was still. She sat up. Slowly. Her maps were neatly stacked beside the bed. Her satchel was packed. Her riding jacket hung over the chair. Her horse's leg had healed enough to travel. Everything was ready, just like every other morning in the May past 5 years when she had packed her things and moved on. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, shouldered her satchel. And walked downstairs. Tieran stood in the kitchen beside the hearth, stirring something slowly in an iron pot. Barefoot. Just like the day she arrived. He looked up when she entered. His eyes moved from her face to the packed satchel on her shoulder. He already knew. The storm broke, he said quietly. I heard. He nodded once. He didn't ask her to stay, didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply stood there with a calm expression that hid something much deeper, something that looked dangerously like heartbreak. The survey records, he said finally. Keep them. My brother would have wanted them used. Tessa swallowed. The pull in her chest had become unbearable. I mapped your castle, she said. Softly. Every room, every corridor. The tower, library. The kitchen. Her voice trembled. I've never mapped a place I stayed before. Tieran didn't move. I only map places I want to remember. she continued. Silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke. The gate will always be open, he said. Quietly, whenever you come back. She nodded. Then she walked past him, through the massive hall. Out the front doors, the morning sky was impossibly blue. The storm had washed the world clean. Her horse waited by the gate. She mounted slowly, rode through the open gates. And began down the mountain trail. 3 steps. Then she stopped. The current inside her chest wasn't humming anymore. It was roaring. Not a place. Not a map. Not a destination. Home. And for the first time in 5 years, home wasn't a location. It was a person. Tessa turned the horse around. She rode back through the gate, walked across the courtyard. And pushed open the castle doors. Tieran was still standing in the kitchen, exactly where she had left him. He looked up when she entered. Shock flashed across his face. The storm stopped, she said softly. I noticed. But I'm still here. Slowly, he straightened. I see that. She dropped her Satchel. Walked across the room, took his face in her hands again, and kissed him. This time the current didn't surge. It settled. Deep. Warm. Steady. I've never stayed anywhere, she whispered. Not once in 5 years, I know. I'm not staying because you asked. He smiled slightly. Then why? She looked into his eyes. Because when I mapped every room in this castle, I realized I wasn't charting a building. Her voice softened. I was drawing my way home. For the first time in years, Tieran laughed. A quiet, startled sound like joy was something he was remembering how to feel. You're going to need a second chair by the fire, she sighed. I'll build you 10. 1 will do. He pulled her into his arms. And outside the castle walls, the mountains of Ashenmore stood silent beneath a clear sky. The storm had brought her there, but it was never the reason she stayed.